Hello and welcome to day 13 of Women in Antiquity. Today we're going to be talking about the role of women in the Roman religious life. One of the things that's important to understand about this topic, of course, is the nature of Roman religion. The customary modern way of thinking is to associate Roman religion with Greek religion, to line up the pantheon from one system to the other, and to generally assume that they are similar in nature. And this is not only an oversimplification, but also a misdirection, because the original Roman idea of religion is in some ways fundamentally different from the Greek. The essential elements of Roman society are understood by the later Romans to have been set in place and ordered by each of the 7 kings of the regal period. And the second king, Numa Pompilius, is associated with and credited with the foundations of Roman religion. This is Roman religion in essentially 2 different kinds of forms. What Numa does is to both organize the way that the Romans think about everyday religion, and more importantly, to arrange the interactions between the state and the official state religion. This is sort of a fundamental difference. Amongst the Greeks, there is no state religion. The religion is collectively owned by the people. There is no priestly class, and there is no formal interaction by the state, separately from the way that religion and religious festivals are conducted by the people of each individual polis. But the Romans start out with a fundamentally different idea. Part of their religion is absorbed from the Etruscans, as we've seen, and this is the state aspect. In other words, the Romans imbibe from the Etruscans the idea that the gods must be consulted before every major action by the state. And so this requires a series of formal rituals of consultation of the gods, conducted by specially qualified priests, and in particular the augurs, who are responsible for the omens and prophecies and other revelations from the gods, through sacrifice, vigils, and other forms of consultation. In association with this, official religion, Numa arranges for the creation of a number of different kinds of formal priesthoods that are responsible for different aspects of the Roman state's interaction with the divine. And so, for example, there are the Curiones, who are responsible for sacrificing for the meetings of the Roman people to ensure that each meeting is under the provinces of the gods. Each important state god has a flamen, who is the official priest dedicated to that god. So, for example, Jupiter has a flamen called the Flamen Dialis, whose job it is to interact with Jupiter, to represent the interests of Jupiter, as it were. The flamenes are wrapped around with a number of taboos in order to protect these particular priests from becoming too powerful politically. Their direct access to the gods make them potentially politically overpowerful, and so the flamen is, especially the Flamen Dialis, the high priest of Jupiter, is not capable of touching iron, cannot be in the presence of a dead body, is not allowed to have laced boots. In other words, is not allowed, in every conceivable, taboo to undertake the things that soldiers and generals must do. And in the Roman state, it is through military acumen and valor that one rises to the height of the highest political office in Rome, which is the consul, the chief duty and responsibility and activity of which is to lead the Roman legions to war. There are also a number of other sort of secondary priesthoods. The Kelleres are a sort of sacred bodyguard for the original king, and even after the kings are lost, they persist and perform special festivals that are associated with the religious duties of the kings. The augurs perform divination, as we've seen. The Vestals, who we'll be talking about in a moment, have a special duty of tending to the sacred fire, and these must be virginal aristocratic women. There are the Salii, whose responsibility is to take care of the shields of Jupiter. The Fetiales, whose role is to carry the grievances of Rome to its enemies in order to seek either the reparation of that grievance or to formally and sacrally charge the enemy with a state of war. The Fetiales are religious ambassadors who carry a sacred duty and are part of the assurance of the Romans that the wars that they undertake are fundamentally just. The Fetiales would operate on behalf of both Rome and the gods, and would not be able to accomplish their duty of warning and seeking, recrimination or charging with war, were it not for the collusion of the gods. Then there are the pontiffs, the priests whose job it is to conduct the public rituals that are undertaken on an extremely regular basis on behalf of the state toward the gods, and these form, not only the actors, the people who perform the rituals, but also who are collectively the priests who advise the state on religious affairs, which is to say, what it is possible for the state to do. And so this forms the heart of the advisory council to the kings that becomes the Senate. And the Senate is made up of those who hold both the pontiff priesthoods and all of the other priesthoods, and as well as a certain number of additional people who are added into it from the most important noble families. And so, at its heart, the most powerful, advisory body, the Senate, even though they don't have legislative power to pass laws, they have a huge role in both in the actions of the states and in the fabric of Roman society and culture. And this, in its origin, is the priesthoods that are hereditary among the patrician families. So that is the state religion. The state religion is the state's interaction with the state gods, the gods that are directly concerned with the entity of Rome. In particular, Jupiter, Mars, the god of war, and Quiritus, the god of Roman citizenship. So Jupiter, Mars, and Quiritus are three the three gods that Rome is primarily concerned with, that Rome is primarily interacting with as a state. But the ordinary, everyday Roman idea of religion is somewhat different. It is less anthropomorphized. Jupiter and Mars and Quiritus are represented in their temples, as with the Greeks and Etruscans, by statues representing a powerful human male form, and are sort of representative of their interaction with the human world. But the Roman idea of ancestral, primeval idea of religion is much more associated with what you might say are abstract spirits, or the spiritual power associated with particular kinds of elements in the everyday world. And these tend to be junctures. They tend to be places of transition. We've seen a little bit of that amongst the Greeks, in particular. Hecate is associated with this kind of idea. And not surprisingly, Hecate, once the Romans become interactive with the Greeks, Hecate holds a particular kind of appeal and complex reactions with Romans. But the original idea of the Romans, from before they were a power, before they interacted with the rest of the world and began absorbing and Romanizing the cultures and traditions of others, is associated with the idea of Numen. The idea of Numen is the idea of the spiritual form that's associated with places of transition, with things that have power over human life, and over the fostering of human life. These are represented by deities that are not always, especially early on, represented in human form. Janus is a god associated with thresholds, doorways, and by extension with the divide between the past and the future. Janus is usually depicted with two faces and facing in opposite directions. Once again, there's a slight connection with Hecate. Vesta is associated with the hearth, and is the spirit of the hearth, and is therefore fundamentally related to the simple act of everyday survival and persistence into the future. Vesta is therefore a guardian of the future and of the protection of things as they are and should be. And this is one of the reasons why Vesta is associated with virgins and is depicted as being virginal, the maintenance and protection of that kind of purity. This has some resonance with that original idea that we talked about at the beginning of the divide between the male and the present, and the female in the future. So here we see a manifestation of this kind of idea. Vesta is responsible for persistence and protection of the future, and is associated with the female, in particular, the virginal female. Terminus is associated with borders and is naturally connected to the borders of lands, of fields and farms. The earliest Romans were not yet literate. They acquired the alphabet and literacy from the Etruscans, and even afterwards, the formal ceremony of transfer of land is conducted as an oral ceremony, which might or might not have a written deed associated with it for extra surety. And the presence of witnesses at these ceremonies is to ensure that there's a chance that later on, if there's a question, someone, in addition to the parties involved, can be consulted as to the details of the transfer, the details of ownership. So this is why legal documents even to this day are witnessed, because originally the witnesses were not people who co-signed a document, but who rather co-witnessed a ceremony of exchange between two people. And this is the same ceremony that's used both for the transfer of property and for the transfer of daughter to husband. And so the boundary stones of a person's farm, a person's land, were sacred to Terminus, and anybody that moves a boundary stone is therefore guilty of sacrilege, and at the very least is going to call down upon him or herself a judgment from the judgment from the divine. This is not necessarily this would be a sort of karma, like counteracting negative force in a person's life. This is a more abstract form of religion, everyday, countryside religion especially, but also within the ordinary people of the city. And so this would not be depicted as Jupiter coming down and smiting someone with a thunderbolt. Jupiter is concerned about the needs of Rome collectively, and how the actions of the Romans affect Rome. Likewise, Mars and Quiritus. So the more mundane aspects of everyday life are belong to this much older world of divine force. The Penates and the Lares are what's known as household gods. These are the spirits that relate to the conduct of everyday life. And the Penates and the Lares are almost never depicted as individual, anthropomorphized, humanized deities. And even Jupiter originally came from these kinds of ideas. Jupiter was the Numen associated with the sky and the weather that comes from the sky. Later, as Rome becomes formalized as an institution and inaugurates its forms of augury and its rituals of consultation, Jupiter becomes the dominant state god. But Jupiter has his roots in this ancient and more abstract form of understanding religion. So, and to a great extent, this idea carries over into even the official religion. In other words, when the Romans are thinking about religion, they have before them, statues of Jupiter. But the way that they think about the gods and the divine is rooted in this idea of Numen, and so is in this way quite different in attitude and sense from the way that the Greeks think about their gods. The other thing that the Romans are very superstitious, which is actually not surprising in the context of Numen. In other words, the way in which the spiritual world responds to the negative and positive actions of individuals in an abstract way, fosters an idea of things being lucky and unlucky, and days being unlucky and lucky. And so the Romans have the idea of fas and nefas, the idea that certain days are lucky and certain days are not lucky, based on good or bad events having taken place in the past, some cataclysm that happens to the Romans, the tragic death of a very important and valued individual, or a calamity on the battlefield, or the day of in which a great earthquake struck, or something like this. the day on which that occurred would be remembered. It was one of the duties of the priest was to keep a calendar in which these literally ominous events were transcribed, recorded for posterity, so that everyone would know that a particular date has this imprint of calamity on it. And the knock-on effect was, a day that is remembered as nephos, as being unlucky, is a day on which it's a bad idea to conduct a business deal. Days that are officially nephos, the markets might even be closed. Also a bad day to get married, and it would be the job of certain kinds of priests to be aware of days that are particularly unlucky for a couple to get married. If a child is born on a day that is unlucky, then that child might be thought of as being unlucky himself or herself, unlucky in his own life, and unfortunate for his or her parents as well. So Vesta is, as I said, very rarely depicted. Here's Vesta being, represented in a not terribly enlightening way on a Roman coin. The SC, by the way, stands for Senatus Consultum, which is to say the coin was struck by a decree of the Senate. But the basic idea is Vesta originates as the spirit of the hearth, and so is central to family life, and so is central to the Roman idea of family. And the idea of family being the fundamental element with which Roman society is constructed and governed, Vesta is at the heart of the Roman identity. And as I said, Vesta has this responsibility to, as goddess of the hearth, Vesta is responsible for everyday life, and from that comes the persistence of that life. Flame is a secondary manifestation of the power to survive and persist through the simple through the simple role that the hearth plays in providing sustenance and warmth. And so this is why, of course, the eternal flame that the Romans bind themselves to, the Romans see as being, the embodiment of Rome's perpetuity. This is the domain of Vesta, and is to be protected by Vesta, and is to be ministered to by the servants of Vesta. Vesta being a female deity that is associated with the purity of the flame, is served by a set of priestesses who are also to be pure. And their responsibility is to ensure Rome's purity and persistence. And so, as a result, we get the Roman identification of the virginal woman with the future of Rome itself. And the priestesses of Vesta, the Vestal Virgins, are amongst the most sacred individuals in Rome, because they are unsullied by the political life. They are locked away, not locked away. They live within their temple in order to ensure their purity. And one of the few capital crimes amongst the Romans, one of the few things that you could be executed for, because the Romans fundamentally do not believe in execution, except in cases of religious crimes of an extreme nature. of sacrilege of the highest order. And one of the greatest sacrileges that you can perform is to violate a Vestal Virgin, the penalty for which, at least during some periods of Roman history, is to be buried alive, both the Vestal Virgin and the violator. And so the Vestal Virgins lived this life of seclusion on behalf of Rome. They, the vitality and success of Rome is understood to depend in part on the purity of these women. And so they are carefully selected from the aristocratic families and live a life that is relatively simple and set aside from the hubbub of the Roman world under the leadership of a chief vestal. And the chief vestal is going to be someone who is a little bit more worldly, someone who might be consulted by aristocratic women for matters of a personal nature, and so the Vestals are sheltered. The chief Vestal slightly less so, but fundamentally they live this secluded life in order that the Romans, both men and women, don't have to. The women of Rome are far from secluded. The idea that the Athenians have that the ideal of female isolation within the home in order to protect them is not part of the Roman equation. The Roman women, as we've seen, the matrons are expected to manage their household and to ensure that the weaving is done and that food is taken care of. But they live as part of the social fabric of Rome. Another important female divine figure that originated as a Numen spirit and later on is depicted as a sort of anthropomorphic god, but fundamentally is thought of in the Numen way. In other words, Fortuna as a goddess is not so much worshipped as understood to be a potent force in everyday life, and so Fortuna is responsible, is identified with the forces that make possible good things or bad things happening to individuals and to the Romans collectively. If she's represented as a human, as an anthropomorphized goddess, she's depicted as she is here with a cornucopia, a horn of plenty. This is if Fortuna has her metaphorical back turned to the Romans, then something is seriously wrong, and the Romans need to rethink their what has occurred in recent memory in order to rebalance the fabric of Roman society. The Fortuna is associated in particular not just with the good or bad things happening with the occurrence of events, but also with the stages of people's lives, and in particular the stages of a woman's life. And so, as a woman passes from one stage of her life to another, she is understood to be under the aegis of a particular aspect of Fortuna. The Romans, like the Greeks, tended to think of these their divine spirits as well as the more formalized state gods as existing literally multifaceted. In other words, they are responsible for different kinds of things, acting in different forms of their being, This is a little bit like, if you're familiar with the Christian idea of the Trinity, where the Christian God is a single God, and yet God's interaction with the world has three aspects. One represented by God the Father, one represented by the Son, who took physical form, and one by the Holy Spirit that interacts in a non-tangible way with the behavior and emotions of individuals and the way in which they relate to each other, the social bonds between them. So likewise, Roman gods have different aspects that are understood to govern their different responsibilities. The Romans have a number of primeval gods and goddesses that are that have a sort of generalized aspect that they don't have necessarily specific jobs so much as they are forces that the Romans bond with in order to ensure their continued success and prosperity. One of the oldest of these is Bona Dea, which is simply the good goddess. And the Bona Dea is a god that exists through the continuation of annual festivals that are attended by the female aristocratic population of Rome. And so the festival of the good goddess would be one in which the women of Rome come together in their own special assembly, their own special festival, their own special ritual. And there is a very famous instance in which a political radical of the late Republic, whose name is Publius Claudius the Beautiful, Publius Claudius Pulcher, was insinuated himself into the festival of the Bona Dea by dressing as a woman. And of course, he was so beautiful as a man that he passed easily as a woman. He was, however, eventually discovered, and the sacrilege involved was not only a scandal, but also a moment in which the Romans feared for their own safety. The violation that occurred was a sacrilege of a unprecedented potency, and to be sure, the Romans entered into a new period of civil war and destruction not long after this. Roma herself, the city of Rome, the community of Rome, is understood to have a spiritual form, and this is Roma is not necessarily a deity that had a lot of potency or interaction. It is more the understanding of the living coalescence of the people that live there and their success and their fortunes. So that if Rome is ever to be destroyed, it would be thought of as being Roma, the goddess, being mortally wounded. One of the most interesting things about this whole story, looking at the female aspects of the Roman religious thinking, is the introduction of an outsider goddess. Isis is a very unusual figure because, as Pomeroy points out in the chapter reading for today, Isis tends to embody both the most important kinds of potencies that are associated with female gods in the ancient world, but also is a manifestation of a number of male divine aspects as well. which is to say, Isis is essentially the Egyptian sky god, amongst other things. And the sky god in other cultures that we look at, whether it's Ahura Mazda amongst the Zoroastrians, or Zeus amongst the Greeks, or Jupiter amongst the Romans, the sky god is usually a male, and the most powerful male. Isis is a representation of the idea that power is not necessarily masculine. And so the process by which Isis becomes part of the Roman religious thinking is fascinating. It's part of the way that the Romans undertake Romanization. In other words, the typical way in which the Romans incorporate territories into their domain is to absorb their culture and make it Roman. And normally this happens by the population, over the course of a generation, transitioning to Latin, the language of the Romans, and to Roman ways of doing things, commercially, legislatively, governmentally, and so forth. But with the persistence of local traditions that can be incorporated into the Roman lifestyle, so that people are not feeling that their heritage is being repressed and that their identity is being compromised. And so the Roman expansion of their empire is one that takes place in many ways voluntarily. The places that Romans gain economic power over, political power, and military power, their first option is to draw them into the fold through the benefits of Roman life. And for the most part, local cultures tend to fade away themselves as the peoples become familiar with Roman ways and tend to embrace Roman culture over time. But there, elements of the culture of the places that Rome rules over hold on to their appeal when they offer themselves as alternatives to the Roman way of thinking. And so Isis holds a great amount of appeal because she represents an attractive alternative to the traditional Roman model. And so not only women, but those who are at a lower level of society can see the cult of Isis as being something other than the normal Roman way. Later on, centuries later, this is how Christianity begins to develop its hold on the Roman world as well, by offering an alternative, by offering, as Isis does, a kind of empowerment for those who in Roman society feel less empowered. And so, the Roman approach to this is not to repress Isis, but rather to embrace her and Romanize her. But the concept of Isis is so powerful in and of itself that Isis holds on to her fundamental Egyptian mystery, even as she becomes a official Roman cult. Okay, so the readings for today: the role of women in the Roman religion. The basic idea here is that Roman women are fundamental to the religious life of the Romans. Religion is not practiced solely by the men. And this is because this is in two ways. At the state level, the religion, the rituals that are part of the function of the state, many of them are performed by men, the augurs and the pontiffs. But there are also rituals that and ceremonies and priestesses that are associated with women and with female gods. And so the Vestal Virgins being one of these, but not the only one. And so in the formal religious life of the Roman state, there are both male and female elements. But in everyday life, in family life, the the practice of religion is part of the conduct of the household, and so is the responsibility both of the male and the female. The male and the female being jointly responsible for the maintenance of the household and the clan. And so, in some ways, the Pontifex Maximus has the chief Vestal as a counterpart. Moreover, each of the priests has a wife who has duties and responsibilities as the wife of a priest. Each flamen has a wife who is a flamina, and the flamina has the responsibility to be a female counterpart to the male priest, to the male flamen, and so forth and so on. So even within the formal state religion, there's both a male and female aspect in a number of different kinds of ways. But fundamentally, both the maiden, the virginal maiden, and the matron are absolutely crucial to the Roman sense of religion being taken care of, and the purpose of religion in protecting the existence and persistence of Rome is not bound up solely with keeping Jupiter and Mars happy. The maintenance and persistence of Rome is rooted in the everyday practice of religion in the household, in the city, in the farmlands, as part of the pattern of the life of every single Roman man, woman, and child. The selection for today from the classical sources, these are letters of Pliny the Younger. We encountered Pliny the Younger earlier when we were talking about the eruption of Vesuvius. Pliny the Younger lives in the later 1st century CE, and is a Roman official who has a number of interactions with the emperor at the time, Trajan, but also is we know him from both public and private correspondence. And so this private correspondence is sort of these random encounters that occur in these letters with women that he has known, and that belong to different classes. So there's mentions of cousins, there's mentions of freed women, and there's a mention of a Vestal, and a chief Vestal who has a certain kind of awe associated with her that is in some ways a counterpart to the power of the emperor himself, because of course it's a different kind of power, and is tied directly into power, maybe the wrong word, authority, is tied into the function that the Vestals serve, that the eternal flame serves, that the goddess Vesta is responsible for, that is part of the persistence of the future of Rome, and the purity of Rome that allows that persistence. The Beard article is an interesting example of an historian talking about historical theories. So Beard, one of the foremost authorities on gender in Rome, as well as Rome itself, is talking about a theory that she had that she's put forward sort of casually in the course of a longer discourse, that it had some reaction, and that she is going back to and thinking about at a later time. The basic idea here is that how do we think about the Vestal Virgin, because the Vestal Virgin, the function that she performs is unique and maps onto both daughter and mother, and so is both maiden and matron. And this would seem to be a contradiction in terms, and so the question sort of becomes, is she both? Is she neither? The way in which this is thought about is in some ways sort of a distraction, because what's most important is the Vestal Virgin is the embodiment of the most important roles assigned both to an ordinary matron and an ordinary maiden, and so is a unique kind of woman representing a unique role in the life and future of Rome. The Clark article on Roman women is a good fundamental summary of key elements of what we know about Roman life at different stages of life and in different social classes. And so this is a good way to look at. This is a good way to get a good overall sense of the Roman, the fundamentals of the Roman female existence. It's also in this article where we get the discussion of the Lex Appia. So the Appian law. If you're writing about that, the discussion on that is on page 207, but it's worth looking at this article in general for the context of that. The Lex Appia, the Appian law, is a sumptuary law. It's a restriction on the wearing of luxury goods, in particular jewelry and so forth, but also in general ostentation. And it's designed to prevent overindulgence in spectacle, both by men and women. But the repeal of this law is something that Roman noble women had long been seeking, because it would allow them to demonstrate their status in a way that is widely recognized in every society, ancient and modern. And so we have Cato the Elder, who is a very extremely conservative and outspoken gentleman who argues vehemently against the repeal of the Appian law. And he does this in terms of the law being representative of the ways in which men use legislation. Men use their control over public life to ensure and control the way in which men and women have separate duties and responsibilities to society. And so we have the quote, call to mind, all those laws on women by which your ancestors restrained their license and made them subject to men. If once they get equality, they'll be on top. And so, this is very interesting to me, because it is a contradiction of the assumption that ancients tended to think of women as being inherently, which is to say naturally, inferior. In fact, most of what we've been seeing in the course of this, of these readings, is quite the contrary. Hesiod feared women not because women are weak, but because men are weak. And Cato the Elder, from the perspective of the aristocratic Roman male, is saying something very similar. That women are so strong, that women have such great power, and part of this is the power to seduce, but not. Part of that is also their natural power to create life, the things that women can do that men cannot. Women are far from being weak, are so powerful that they have to be kept from exerting that power over men in order to ensure that men retain their position in society. If those impediments are removed and equality is established, women, by virtue of the extra abilities that men do not have, will be in a superior position. And so, if you came into this course thinking that women of the ancient world were thought to be inferior, I strongly challenge that idea. And hopefully, if you're writing about this topic, then this is something that you will address in your paper. Theodora and Antonina. So this carries us, far forward in the Roman story into the empire of the Eastern Romans, the Byzantine Empire, the Middle Ages, which is the Roman Empire, but in the East, and with Greek as the fundamental language. But it is still the Roman Empire. There are still Roman emperors ruling from Constantinople, starting with Constantine himself. And so in the Historia Arcana, the secret history, there have long been a series of discussions and debates about the way that women are presented and depicted in the secret history. And essentially what this article is doing is pointing out the fact that what's really important here is why Theodora and Antonina are depicted as being so unscrupulous, as using this power that they have over men in order to seek their ambition and greed. And this carries over in general. When a story is being told about a woman that presents an exaggerated level of her actions and capabilities. Think back to Antigone and Medea, the two most important Greek representations of extreme female behavior in different ways. The real question is, why is it being told this way? Not that these women, whether you're talking about Theodora or Antigone or Medea, are representative of normal female behavior. Obviously, they are not. They cannot be mapped onto, how women normally lived. Rather, the question is, what is the meaning of the story? What is the intent of the writer? Likewise with the Aeneid. So the Aeneid is the very famous story written by Virgil, in which Aeneas flees the destruction of Troy in order to, after undertaking a number of Odyssean-esque wanderings, find his way to the foundation of Rome. And so by this means the Romans create for themselves a sort of a classical origin story for themselves, and as a counterpart, as inheritors, as descendants of the Trojans, as being a counterpart to the Greek. And so by this means they're able to sort of both set themselves alongside the Greeks as peers, and also to represent elements of the ancient past that are worthy of a great civilization, while at the same time being able to turn history back around to undo the fraud by which Troy was destroyed and reassert the balance of power. But be that as it may, so this is part of the Romans establishing themselves as a proper great civilization, just as legitimate, just as valid as the Greek and the Etruscan, despite the fact that they are supposedly much younger. Actually, once the story of Aeneas was invented, they're not younger anymore. Anyway, the point is, along the way, Aeneas ends up at Carthage, and Carthage is under the rule of a queen called Dido, and so the way in which Aeneas interacts with Dido, of course, has a great deal to do with the Rome's history with Carthage as being during a period of Rome's greatest ambition during the Republic. Carthage was Rome's greatest enemy, its nemesis, and eventually Carthage was defeated and then destroyed. And so the story that's being told 200 years later, in which the founder of Rome meets with the queen of Carthage, who falls in love with Aeneas and is heartbroken by Aeneas's departure, is very much fraught with the history of Rome's relationship with Carthage. At the end, once Aeneas has left, Dido throws herself on a funeral pyre and is herself destroyed. And so, you know, um, the interesting thing that that Perkell is pointing to, amongst other things, is the fact that you know, Dido is depicted as being giving over herself, devoting herself to Aeneas and desiring to join their lines together. But Aeneas has a greater destiny, and so must leave Carthage behind, must leave Dido behind. And so, you know, if anybody could have wondered whether Carthage had to be destroyed, whether, you know, there was a possibility of Rome and Carthage joining together and creating the greatest empire in the world. This is Aeneas as a manifestation of the idea that Rome has a greater destiny than Carthage, that Aeneas had to forsake Dido, and Dido ended up being destroyed as a result. And, you know, of course, Aeneas having a greater destiny, you know, he's not depicted as being torn up over, you know, feelings for Dido versus his own responsibilities to his own fate. His main concern is how does he deal with the fact that he has to leave, and you know.